Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Small Talk podcast. My name is Katy Fairman, and this week on the podcast, we are chatting all things Drive to Survive Season 7. There is a new season that drops this week, and I've been able to see all 10 episodes ahead of time, and you know what? I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I think it's one of the best seasons we've actually had, so I'm really looking forward to kind of going through episode by episode, talking about the best bits, the worst bits, the bits that I personally think they've missed. I'm not going to spoil too much because I also want you guys to watch it and enjoy it as you watch it. So let's get into things. But for those of you that are listening on audio, exciting announcement. I'm actually going to be filming these podcasts and they're going to be on YouTube. So don't cancel this now and rush off to YouTube to go and watch it because you'll ruin my analytics. Maybe you can watch the podcast twice, listen to it on audio and watch it on YouTube. But for those of you that are on YouTube, hello, this is the studio. It's all very exciting and very new. But let's get straight into things. Season 7 of Drive to Survive. I can't believe we're here already. It feels like only a few years ago we were watching season 1 together. And I know that it's had plenty of criticism over time. And I've been some of the people like giving criticism about it. But do you know what? I am really pleasantly surprised about season 7. There's still not as much Lewis Hamilton content. There's still not much Max Verstappen content. Obviously, he said a few years ago he didn't really want anything to do with it. But the storylines that they have followed make sense. There are still big things that they're missing out on. But let's have a look at what all the episodes are. I've got the names of the episodes and a little bit of a hypnosis. I can never say this word. Hypnosis. I don't really know what it is. Who knows? I've got lovely producer Paul, who's also in the back of shot. He doesn't know either, but we're going to go with it. Synopsis, I think, yeah. It's that one word. There's a couple of words that, like, I knew I was going to say it in the back of my mind, and I was like, I'm going to trip up on it, and sure enough, I did. But so episode 1, business as usual. It says, ahead of the new season, the drama has already begun. Lewis Hamilton makes a drastic decision, which is almost overshadowed by a shocking allegation. Guess we know what that one's about. Episode 2 is frenemies. Lando Norris has spent his career coming second to Max Verstappen. Can this be the year he overtakes his friend and makes a bid for the championship? Episode 3, looking out for number 1. Without Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes have a seat to fill for 2025. George Russell thinks he's ready to step up to be lead driver, but does Toto Wolff agree? Episode 4, Carlos Sainz, except it's not Sainz as in his surname, Sainz as in signs a contract. Gosh, Netflix, you and your puns. I do feel like the titles of these, they could have been a little bit better. We've had some really good ones over the years. I feel like there was a bit more potential, but we'll take Carlos Sainz. I like the pun. Drop from Ferrari, Carlos Sainz has a big decision to make for next season. As 2 teams vie for his attention, he gets a call from an old friend. Episode 5, Leclerc of Leclerc, which is not really my favourite title, but it's the Monaco Grand Prix and all eyes are on Charles Leclerc. With his country's hopes hanging on his shoulder, the pressure starts to get to him. Episode 6, Wheels of Fortune. The Constructors' Championship is with McLaren's grasp. The car is performing, the drivers are excelling, but their strategy might hold them back. In the Heat of the Night is episode 7. This one is a spoiler alert, but my personal favourite. I think it's one of the best episodes they've done in recent years. It's so good. 5 of Formula One's most famous drivers and lifelong friends film their behind-the-scenes experiences of the brutal Singapore Grand Prix. So we get some BTS footage. It's more than just the Netflix cameras following them around. It's so good. I cannot wait to talk to you about that one. Episode 8, Elbows Out. After a record-breaking 2023, Red Bull has a lot to live up to. With one driver slowing the team down, veterans and newcomers alike battle for his seat. Episode 9, we're nearly there. Episode 9, under new management, Haas have a new team principal. As we know, Günther Steiner was gone. He does make a little cameo, does Günther, as one of the stars of Drive to Survive. You can't not. That's not in the title description, by the way. That's just me rambling on. Alpine has welcomed back a legend of the sport. Between them, the rivals are locked in a battle worth millions of dollars. And finally, episode 10, called Endgame. It's all giving very much Marvel Avengers, but as the season nears its climax, the outcome hangs on a knife's edge. Can underdog McLaren stand a chance against the powerhouse of Ferrari and Red Bull. So they're all of the 10 episodes that you have to look forward to. But as promised, we're going to go through them episode by episode. But before we do, I have to have a sip of tea. I mentioned Paul earlier, bless him. He's already making me cups of tea. I've got him well and truly whipped. But it's true. This is the all-important taste test. That is lovely. Thank you very much. Very soothing. Need that after all, talking through all those episodes. So I'm afraid it's bad news if you're not a Christian Horner fan, because Christian Horner is the main character of Drive to Survive in season 7. He is in it a lot. We see a lot of him at home with his wife, Jerry Halliwell Horner. She's in it a lot. And obviously we've got the storyline of the investigation that he faced at the start of last season. And, you know, Max isn't in it. So I feel like Horner fills in a lot of those storylines. But yeah, this is the Christian Horner season, which I don't think is going to go down particularly well with quite a lot of you, because I know he certainly divides opinion. But yeah, the episode starts with the Hamilton to Ferrari news, because why wouldn't it? Happened in the off season. Obviously, it was one of the biggest stories coming into 2024, and it starts at the Mercedes launch, and we kind of get our first glimpse into what Toto's initial thoughts were. You know, he said that he was so surprised at the timing. It addresses the fact that Carlos Sainz is going to be replaced by Hamilton, and what Carlos is going to do. But yeah, the Mercedes, Hamilton, Ferrari sort of storyline takes up maybe the first third of the episode, and then we go into Christian Horner and the allegations he received, these inappropriate conversations on WhatsApp and beyond with this female colleague. And I'll be honest, it doesn't give away too much more than what we already know. It kind of just follows the timeline of events, you know, when all of the team principals and the media received a link to the Google Drive with all that evidence in, if you want to call it that. There's not really much covered in terms of anything new that we see. It's more just addressing the fact that this was a huge scandal and a huge story in Formula One, and kind of took over from everything else that was going on. And Red Bull and Horner don't comment too much on it. It's all very much like recycling the same line of, this is an ongoing investigation, we don't want to talk about it. So yeah, that is business as usual. That's kind of the first episode. I'm gonna have a sip of my tea. The next episode we have is Frenemies, and this is Netflix very much trying to cause a rivalry between Lando and Max. And, you know, they certainly had their moments on track. We kind of open up the episode with them talking about how they grew up together. We've got the adorable footage of Max and Lando when Lando's like 3 foot tall and Max is way, way taller. And they got that famous handshake, that picture from many, many years ago. But they basically are going into how Max is so good and Lando has yet to win. You know, they make reference to the Lando no-wins nickname that he's got. They even ask him about it, which I thought was a bit on the nose. But we get quite a lot of behind the scenes with Lando and McLaren in Miami, which could be coincidence. I don't know if they were following him before that point or whether it was just perfect timing. But obviously this is where he gets his maiden win in Formula One. So if you're a Lando fan, you get quite a lot of BTS from that weekend. It's nice to kind of be I guess like on board with him for that weekend, for that victory, which is nice. Max is shown in this episode, but I wonder how much of it is from old seasons. They show some 2023 footage of Lando and Max playing paddle, for example, and there's a small section where Max does do a sit down, but I don't know. I don't want to say that's definitely from last year because it could be an old clip. It's just him talking about Lando and the respect they've got for each other. But like Max is not the main character of this. This is mainly all about Lando. My next comment for this is that Jenson Button is in it. Woo! And that's all in capitals because I'm really excited about that. I love Jenson Button and he makes an excellent addition as a talking head. They have got rid of Danica Patrick, which I know lots of you will be probably very pleased about. I think that's fair. I understand her addition last season being an American voice, and also as a former racing driver, she, had some okay insight. But for me personally, I feel like Jenson Button is a much better fix. We've also got way more Claire Williams, which I'm so pleased about because I think she's brilliant. Does mean that it makes it quite British centric. Obviously, we've still got Will Buxton, he's still there. But yeah, all of the three kind of talking heads in it are all British, but I think it works. British bias maybe, but Jensen has some good additions. And in this episode, they obviously bring up Austria, kind of the first clash we see of Max and Lando on track. Although I find it weird that there's no mention of the fact that George Russell goes on to win that race. And that is a relevant point because I will be mentioning that later. But yeah, the episode is basically Netflix trying to make it seem like a significant rivalry and explaining how good the McLaren was and how maybe they were throwing away a couple of opportunities. But yeah, that's very much like a Max Lando big battle that's going to be sort of developing over the rest of the season. Okay, episode 3. I'm going to put my tea down. Hold on. I was going to be holding it for the whole thing. Episode 3 is looking out for number 1. And so this is Mercedes, specifically Toto Wolff, kind of facing the dilemma that Lewis Hamilton is leaving the team and who are they going to put in that car to replace him? Because obviously it's such a huge void. It's a big decision to make. And I feel like this is a good episode. It starts with Lewis saying that he feels like there will never be a time where I'm not a Mercedes driver, which he said, I think, towards the end of the 2023 season, which obviously has been timed very, very well. But we hear from Toto and his wonderful wife, Susie, at home. And I say home sort of in quotes because it's kind of stressed me out this year how much Drive to Survive is showing these personalities at their homes, if it is their homes. We get it with Toto, we get it with James Fowles. We literally see him leaving, like using his front door. There's a point where we see it with Lando, and I don't know if we quite get the number on the front of his house or his flat or his apartment in Monaco, but I don't know, something about it just sits kind of uneasy with me. It could well be that these are, like fake setups. If you watch Gogglebox in the UK, sometimes they film outside of houses and you go, is that really where they live? Or is this just one for show? But I don't know, it kind of stressed me out. I don't know if it's like a security risk or if I'm being like absolutely mental, which is probably the case. But for me, I just feel like there are people that will be able to watch that and then be like, right, I know exactly the building that Toto Wolff lives in, and they can hang around it. And I don't know, it could be that I'm being slightly neurotic, but that's something that certainly I made note of. But away from that, they're trying to decide who does he pick. Carlos and Lewis have a couple of conversations which Drive to Survive are able to pick up on in press conferences, where Carlos is asking Lewis, what were the real reasons you kind of left? Do you think Mercedes will win again? Saying that Toto hadn't reached out to Carlos and all that kind of stuff. They're also trying to kind of poke the bear in terms of Max Verstappen and see if he is interested. Obviously, Christian Horner isn't too happy about that. But in the end, it kind of goes on George needing to perform in order to prove that he can be the one that leads that team, that he can be that number 1 driver that fills Lewis's shoes. And the reason that I mention Austria is because a lot of this episode focuses around how George Russell has to perform over Silverstone. Yet they fail to mention that he won the last race. I feel like that's a bit of a weird one. You've got Will Buxton saying he's got to really prove that he can do this. And yes, you could say George Russell won Austria on luck. Obviously, you had the clash between Verstappen and Norris, which enabled George to pass them and take the win. But I still feel like that's a really important piece of context that is completely missed when talking about this episode. But we also see George winning in Spa later on, but then they failed to mention that he was completely disqualified, and that for his underweight car, you've obviously got all the scenes of him winning and stuff, and that's enough to prove to Toto that he had, like a real hero's drive, and that was enough for him to prove that he's deserving of that seat. And obviously, it's not George's fault that his car is underweight. It's one of the things that the team slipped up on. But yeah, I just find the context around this all a bit weird. I don't get why you wouldn't mention Austria. I don't get why you wouldn't mention the Spa disqualification. Obviously, focusing around Silverstone, you also had Lewis Hamilton winning that race. That was such an emotional moment and one of the best moments throughout the whole of the season, in my opinion. And so the fact that it's covered, but I feel like they've not really pulled on the viewers' heartstrings as to how important that was, because obviously Lewis inherited the win at Spa because of George's disqualification. But for lots of us, we thought maybe that will be Lewis Hamilton's last ever victory in Formula One. Obviously, we don't know how he's going to behave and perform at Ferrari. But yeah, I was surprised that there wasn't more of an emphasis on Lewis winning Silverstone. We also get to spend a little time with Kimi Antonelli before it's announced that he does take on a role at Mercedes alongside George. It's not very much time. I'm sure that he'll probably be given a significant amount of time next season. But we go to see him race in sports cars at Imola. Toto Wolff is there. And yeah, he's has some time on camera, and we also get to listen in to the phone call of him being told he's got the Mercedes seat, which things like this are always going to be staged. You can't tell me that he's going to be like, oh, wow, I can't believe I've got this phone call from Toto Wolff at the exact moment Netflix are in my apartment. What a crazy coincidence. So it's all a little staged, but it's still a nice introduction to Kimi Antonelli. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets on this season and how much of a part he'll play next season in Drive to Survive. And then episode 4, Carlos Sainz. Where does Carlos go for 2025 is basically the plot line for this episode. He has talks with Williams as well as Sauber/Audi. They make reference to the fact that his dad's got this amazing time with Audi, all of this history, all of this success, and obviously that's a huge influence on whether he decides to go down that avenue. There is mention that he got his appendix out in Jeddah, but I don't think there was maybe enough time spent on that, because that story of him having his appendix out over that weekend, the fact that Ollie Behrman made his debut, that's really not referenced at all. And that's a storyline that for me was one of the standouts from 2024. And then the fact that, he'd had this appendix out, came back, it was something crazy like 16 days later, and then managed to win in Australia. It is referenced, but for me, I would have maybe put a bit more emphasis on that. We spend a lot of time with James Vowles in this episode and his desire to sign Carlos. We know from last year he was talking about how much he was thinking about Carlos all the time. He kept making references to like secret meetups in hotel rooms. It all sounded a bit seedy and a bit weird, but we see a little bit more of that over this episode. And we also hear from Alessandro Aluni Bravi, who is a team representative at Stake. He's now gone to McLaren since this episode has aired. But he is a super high-power lawyer and is basically talking about how they want to sign Carlos and the process behind that. And the episode kind of gets to a point where we are in a hotel room. James Vowles is there. They've shut all the curtains. They've got all the paperwork ready for Carlos to come and sign it. And he no-shows. He doesn't appear. And it's all this panic of, oh gosh, what are we going to do? We've been stood up. Has he changed his mind? And insert Flavio Briatore. And I have my quite strong opinions on Flavio. I don't think he should have been allowed back into the sport after all the controversy that he had before. Something about him just doesn't sit right with me. Although, obviously, there are lots of people up and down that pit lane, that paddock, that have got huge amounts of respect for him. And they do touch upon the controversies, the reason why he maybe is not everyone's flavour of the month. But yeah, Flavio comes in and he's got other ideas and he tries to pinch Carlos from Alpine, which is a storyline that definitely had some traction last year, but has not really, I feel like some of the information we've been given in this episode is really good BTS kind of stuff. So it would have been interesting to see what happened there. But in the end, as we all know, Carlos went and signed for Williams, but this makes me think that this is all kind of a little bit staged, because Carlos goes back to sign this contract with Williams, and the setup, I think even the clothes they're wearing are almost identical to what we saw maybe 10 minutes prior when Carlos stood them up in the hotel. So part of me wonders how much of this is staged, how much that really happened. I hope that some of the journalists that are on the ground in Melbourne for the start of the season can kind of delve into that, because if he stood them up, then that is quite an interesting and amusing storyline. But I don't know how much that was done for the benefit of Netflix. That's always the kind of big question mark over some of the stuff we see in Drive to Survive, is how much of it is reality and how much of it is fiction. But they're the first 4 episodes. Let's take a moment and come back and talk about the curse of Leclerc, because I feel like that's one of the good ones. So all of you Charles Leclerc fans are gonna love episode 5, because whether it was chance, coincidence, I don't know, Drive to Survive and the Netflix team basically follow him for the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. And the idea is that, as we all know as F1 fans, Charles Leclerc has got this horrible curse when it comes to his home race. One reason or another, he's either crashing into walls, or he's having car problems, or Ferrari mess him over with the strategy. You name it, the poor lad has suffered it in Monaco. And in 2024, we got to see him win his home race. And there was so much emotion around this, which some of it is picked up on, but for me, it still doesn't live up to like the absolute chills, goosebumps moment of when Alex Jakes, the incredible commentator for F1 TV, is narrating sort of after Charles comes out of the tunnel in Monaco. We kind of know that he's going to win this race, and he delivers this incredible monologue, and all the feels. But I feel like it's still a good episode. Not maybe quite as emotional. I mean, depending on what you're like, you might need a box of tissues to watch this one. I cry at everything, and there weren't any tears from my side, but you never know. You might be different watching at home. So we spend a lot of time with Charles at home and around Monaco. There's a funny moment at the start of the episode where his card declines at the supermarket, which is labelled as insufficient funds. Which you think, mate, you're a Ferrari Formula One driver. How can you have insufficient funds? I don't know what he's been spending his money on, maybe his ice cream range or something like that. But that's quite a funny moment, and Netflix managed to capture that. But yeah, it's nice. We spend a lot of time with him and his family. He speaks a lot about his father, and, you know, the story about how he lied about getting a F1 contract before he passed away, and why, you know, he's got that just dream to do well at his home race. And it goes into the Monaco curse and how he overcame that in 2024 to win. Like I said, really nice, happy vibes, but I just feel like there wasn't quite that level of emotion that maybe we could have had, but it was still a nice episode. We also spend time with Charles on a yacht, which there seems to be like a theme throughout this season where we go scuba diving with George Russell and Toto Wolff. We end up on a yacht with Charles Leclerc, and there's a couple of other instances. I feel like this is not, you know, what I'm watching it for, but if you like seeing drivers with no tops on, then this is a great season for you, because there's loads of it for some weird reason. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. But I'm sure there's going to be lots of GIFs I see through certain episodes ending up on my Twitter or my Instagram or TikTok or whatever, which maybe I'm outing my algorithm here on the internet. But anyway, swiftly on. Next episode is called Wheels of Fortune, which makes a reference to the fact that Zach Brown, when he was younger, was on an episode called Wheels of Fortune, I think, which is in the US, and he won the money, and it started him in go-karts. So that's kind of a reference to that. But yeah, this episode is based around the Constructors' Championship and how it's in with McLaren's grasp. The car is performing, the drivers are excelling, but their strategy might hold them back. So yeah, we go into the fact that McLaren have the best car, quote unquote, and they're throwing wins away. Things like Canada, for example, is mentioned. We obviously have mentioned Lando's Miami win in an earlier episode, but we've then got the aftermath of Hungary and the controversy surrounding Oscar and his maiden win. I really wish we'd heard more from Oscar throughout this whole season. He's mentioned a bit, he definitely does sit downs and stuff, but It's very much the Lando show this season. Talking of Lando, there is a lot of Max Futrell, which is nice because he's a lovely guy. I can't remember what I've mentioned on the podcast. I've done about 4 episodes in the last year, so it's a long time since I've recorded some stuff. But I had the chance to meet him last year, probably around this time, to be honest. I did a karting event with him and Quadrant and Lego, which was really cool. And yeah, he's a really down-to-earth, chill guy. So I'm glad Lando's got somebody like him in his life. But we see quite a lot of him throughout this season. We also speak about Monza and the drama of that opening lap. Although the way that the narration of this episode is that their first lap it wasn't even a tussle. It was just Oscar just going for it and taking the lead from Lando on that opening lap. But the idea is that was solely responsible for them losing the race win, which I don't think is true. The fact is that Charles Leclerc was an absolute god with his tyres and managed a one-stop strategy, which is why they won it. And at the time, I feel like the fact that he was doing a one-stop was considered so kind of crazy and out there that none of us were really expecting it. I mean, maybe my memory is patchy. I don't know. But for me, I don't really see how Oscar Piastri being like, I'll show them, and getting that move past Lando, who I think was caught sleeping a bit, resulted in them losing the race win. But drive to survive, gonna drive to survive. We've then also got the decision behind choosing Lando as the number 1 driver in that team. And then how they kind of close up the gap in the Constructors' Championship to Red Bull. So one for the McLaren fans. But yeah, I just wish we'd heard more from Oscar. But then at the same time, he's such a kind of mature, sometimes a bit muted. Like, I love Oscar. I think his sense of humour is wicked. He's really got a really dry sense of humour. He's very sarcastic. So perhaps, he's not silly enough to kind of go on a massive rant to Drive to Survive, but I wish that we'd kind of heard his side of the story a bit more. Episode 7, my favourite. This is so good, guys. You are going to absolutely love this one. In the Heat of the Night. So this, as I said, is 5 F1 drivers and lifelong friends film their behind-the-scenes experiences of the brutal Singapore Grand Prix. I've got here in capitals I've got it here in capitals on my notes. Best episode in years. I honestly, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. This is getting all the praise it should. So as the episode suggests, 5 drivers, which are Lando Norris, George Russell, Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly and Charles Leclerc, are all given their own phone, mobile, iPhone, whatever it is, and they are told to record whatever they want from the Singapore Grand Prix. So some of them are, giving hotel tours. Some of them are using it as a reason to get out of maybe some fan events or signing loads of autographs and stuff like that. They're like, I can't take a picture of you, I'm filming for Netflix. So they're kind of taking the mickey a bit. But this is such a good group of drivers. As we kind of mentioned, they're all really close mates. Obviously, we've got the OG Twitch quartet in there with Lando, George, Alex and Charles, and the addition of Pierre Gasly. But yeah, it's really lovely. We get to see them doing paddle. We have a clip of Pierre and Charles doing dinner. And it's just a chance for us to kind of get to know the drivers on a more personal level, which I feel like is one of the main reasons I'm certainly watching Drive to Survive for. I'm looking for the drama and the juicy bits and the fact to just see more of the drivers. I kind of tune out a little bit when it's time for the on-track stuff, because we've watched the season before. I don't need reminding at what an incredible comeback drive Max Verstappen had in Sao Paulo, which is featured in a later episode. For me, I want to just see more behind the scenes kind of stuff, but it's a really lovely, wholesome episode. And as it mentioned, Singapore is a brutal race. These drivers are losing sometimes 4 kilograms of sweat of their own body weight. It's crazy. And there is a moment in this episode which I'm really, I'm proud of George for letting it be shown, because he has a really difficult Singapore Grand Prix and he's understandably absolutely wiped out from what he's just had to experience. They talk about the reality of driving in those temperatures and in that humidity, and the fact that the walls are so close and it's such a taxing race, it was kind of giving me Qatar flashbacks from 2023 when, all these drivers are talking about nearly passing out behind the wheel. And yeah, we see George post-race and he looks really unwell. I mean, they showed a teaser of it in the trailer and the kid looks almost grey after the race. He just does not look okay. And then he does a bit to camera and then the door shuts and it sounds as if he has a panic attack, which for those of you that are fortunate enough never to have experienced that, it's a horrible thing. Your breathing goes all funny. Speaking from experience, your body kind of freezes up, and it can happen when maybe you've overexerted yourself, as you would have seen here, or lots of other reasons for it. But we see George in a very vulnerable, we hear George, in a very vulnerable state. And I feel like examples like that are quite important because these drivers can sometimes see completely indestructible. So, I'm pleased George has agreed for that to kind of be aired because that's a very vulnerable moment for a person. But yeah, overall, I think, as I said, this is a 10 out of 10 episode, and I can't wait for all the moments behind it. Also, Alex Albon is just the most adorable person in the whole wide world. I just love him so much. You really get a sense of his personality. He's just an absolute goofball. I mean, all the drivers, so like the other four, they're all showing themselves waking up, early in the morning, they've not got a shirt on, they're like, oh, hi guys, good morning, it's race day. And then there's Alex Albon filming some window cleaners in a building opposite being like, oh, that bloke's forgot his sponge, he's got to go all the way down to the bottom. It's just so sweet. So all the love for Alex Albon forever and always. On to quite a different episode. This one made me emotional for all the wrong reasons. This is a Daniel Ricciardo episode, guys. This is the one where he's leaving, he's gone. For those of you, I put a Q&A or like a question out on Instagram, and it was like, what would you like to see most from this season of Drive to Survive? And as well as people mentioning all of Albon's pets, which fair play, I'm afraid there isn't much of his cats and dogs and horses and whatever else he's got. But lots of you mentioned Ricciardo, and yeah, we do get a Ricciardo episode. I miss him so much, and even in this he's got some really good one-liners, which I'm pleased about because he's delivered some absolute belters over the years, many of which I cannot repeat because I will get this podcast demonetized. But we see a lot of him at home in Australia, which I love. I think that's some of my favourite sort of behind the scenes Netflix stuff is when we get to see him on the farm in Perth, he's got his nieces and nephews and stuff like that. We see some of his parents. And yeah, it's just a really nice episode, and it's evident that he's thinking about the decision to leave at this point in the season, but he says he doesn't want to say it out loud because it's too vulnerable, kind of what he's got going on inside his mind. We also see Sergio Perez and his struggles, and we've also got Liam Lawson, who's evidently bored of waiting in the wings. He's really desperate to get in that car, give him a chance. So that's kind of the big storyline for maybe the first 2/3 is, what are we going to do about Daniel Ricciardo? What are we going to do about Sergio Perez? What are we going to do about Liam Lawson? And I mean, the narrative of this episode, I feel like it's not true to what actually happened because as far as my understanding goes, Perez was meant to be out mid-season. Ricciardo was meant to be promoted up to Red Bull, and that just didn't happen. There was obviously something that came along, whether that might be financially from Sergio Perez's side. Helmut Marko had a change of heart. I don't know the reasonings, but I do know that Ricciardo was meant to be receiving that promotion. Sergio was meant to be out, but he ended up seeing out the rest of the season. I'm surprised that maybe that aspect of things wasn't shown. I don't know why. But we follow the Silverstone test that Liam Lawson does after the race. They bring in Max Verstappen. It's like 4 days after the British Grand Prix weekend. They bring in Max to sort of set a banker lap for that to be compared against Liam, who, he's saying, I haven't driven anything in 7 months. I don't really know how good I'm going to be. And my goodness, that kid is fast. He was 0.2 off Max's time. When you think Max is undoubtedly one of the best drivers, if not the best driver on the current grid. And he had not only raced that entire Silverstone circuit a few days before, but he's had a whole season in that car so far. So, yeah, the fact that Liam was able to jump in and be that rapid straight away is obviously one of the reasons why he's now in Red Bull Racing as Max's teammate for 2025. But yeah, we have the news that Ricciardo gets replaced by Lawson, and we have what I would call the final sit down with Ricciardo, which is, if you've had a look and seen the images online, there's a picture of him smiley as ever in just a plain t-shirt. He's not wearing any of that branded race stuff. He's not, with a team clearly at this point. And he's got a whiskey that he's brought with him for his final sit down, which is sweet. And they kind of have a recap of his time in Drive to Survive and his time in his career. I'll be honest, I feel like Drive to Survive did more to celebrate Ricciardo than Red Bull Racing ever did, and VCARB. So I'm glad that Drive to Survive have kind of shown him that respect. And yeah, I don't know, I just feel so sad watching that because I miss Ricciardo a lot. He was such a great personality, and I hope that wherever he is, he's doing okay, because we all miss him. He's kind of gone a bit off the grid. But yeah, it was a nice way to kind of end that relationship with Drive to Survive, because in the first few seasons he was kind of the big star of it. So I love the fact that he bought this whiskey. He said, I haven't got any kind of commitments now, I can drink on the job, so fair play to him. And then at the end of the episode, we kind of follow Liam Lawson and Sergio Perez and their beef in Mexico. And then it's sort of ending with Liam becoming a Red Bull Racing driver. So that was a pretty jam-packed episode. Episode 8 was a good one. Episode 9, under new management, is following Haas and Alpine. So obviously Günther Steiner got the sack. They talked to him for a couple of minutes, deliver some great one-liners again, what Günther's good for. But we have an introduction with Günther out and Ao in, and so we meet a bit more of Ao and kind of get introduced into who he is. And the storyline of the episode is how Haas and Alpine are fighting for P6 in the championship. We also, as I mentioned before, we have the return of Flavio at Alpine, so he gets more airtime, which I'm not too happy about, but it's what it is. Absolutely no mention of Ollie Oakes either, new team principal at Alpine. He's kind of in a few back of the shots, but he never gets time to kind of sit down in the chair as far as I can remember, or if he did, it was that unimpressive. I can't even remember it. So, just a lot of Flavio. And yeah, we have coverage from Interlagos with Haas and the Alpine strategy. Obviously, Alpine having that absolute masterclass with the second and third place finishes, because they didn't pit for Inters. They just kind of stuck it out. And we see a little bit of Ollie Behrman in this episode because he had to replace an unwell Kevin Magnussen. But as I mentioned before, I feel kind of sad for Ollie, because I feel his stories, and I'll kind of get onto this in a little bit, but one of his stories of him getting his debut and how well he did considering across, which races were it? Jeddah, Baku. We never hear about Kevin's ban either. And then Interlagos. I feel like he does such a good job, and it's kind of really not mentioned. There's also reference to Alpine and Esteban parting ways and joining Haas, and we see some at-home content with Ocon and his family. Ocon's got a very cute cat, black cat. Any animal lovers out there, the people that were in my Instagram comments, that's that one you'll enjoy. And then, Jack Doohan, he's referenced in it, getting the promotion. I'm sure lots of you have seen the clip of him and Flavio in the office in Enstone, where Flavio is saying, I control you every millimetre. I don't know why I'm making him sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger there, but it was a terrible impression. Oh dear. I'm not going to be asked back to the studio. But yeah, it's a good episode. Netflix, I didn't read the email they sent me properly, and the order that it appeared on my Netflix was in a different order to how it should be watched. So this was like the third one I watched, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, we've gone from start of the season and now we're talking about Brazil, which is like almost to the very end of the calendar. I don't really get the order, but it's because I'm an idiot and I didn't read. But no, that was a good episode. And then it's actually kind of a shame because, as I mentioned, I feel like this has been one of the strongest seasons we've had in recent times. Episode 10, though, is one of the most boring I've ever seen. It was pretty rubbish. There's not really much behind the scenes stuff at all. It's mainly filled up of on-track stuff. And I'm aware that I'm going to be biased because I am somebody that's actually watched the 2024 season. So for me, this is just a repeat. It's like watching a YouTube highlights package, and I don't really need that. But for new fans of the sport, I can understand the reasoning for it. It kind of just joins up a load of storylines. We get to see the Max incredible Interlagos win and how that really proves he's one of the best. It mentions how he closes up the driver's title and eventually takes the championship in Vegas. And then there's the kind of big question mark over who will win the Constructors' Championship. Will it be McLaren? Will it be Ferrari? Spoiler alert, it was McLaren. But yeah, the worst episode of the season by far. I spent most of it on my phone watching what was going on in the IndyCar. So for those of you that maybe haven't watched the 2024 season, which I'd be really interested to find the stats of who's actually watching Drive to Survive and what percentage of them have never watched any F1, and those of us that are like diehard crazy kind of fans. But yeah, for me, that was a bit of a bummer, like that it ended on such a low. But anyway, can't keep everyone happy. And so, yeah, the big stories that I was surprised that were missing or that I wanted to see more of. Not really any mention of Logan Sargent. So his departure and being replaced by Franco Colapinto. Franco Colapinto has absolutely no screen time. He might be, I think he's mentioned maybe once when they're talking about Interlagos and the fact that he had that crash. But as far as I remember, there's no time with him sat in a studio, doing his bits to camera, which I feel like a lot of Argentinian fans are going to be pretty upset about because he is a huge personality. I don't know what the reason for that was, because it's not like there's a really evident storyline that they're like, maybe we'll wait for 2025 because he's not got a drive. So I don't really know why that wasn't kind of covered. As I mentioned, Hamilton winning in Silverstone was not given enough time, in my opinion. There's no mention of Adrian Newey to Aston Martin or Jonathan Wheatley leaving the team, which, especially the Adrian Newey to Aston Martin news, which, side note, first day of Adrian Newey as part of that team today, 3rd of March is when this is being recorded. Start of a really exciting chapter in the history of Formula One. But yeah, no mention of that. Maybe they're leaving it for an episode in season 8, which seems crazy that we're already talking about season 8 and season 7 isn't even available yet. And then, yeah, not much mention of the rookies like Ollie and the fact that he made the step up in Jeddah. I appreciate that they've probably got a lot of things they're trying to focus on. And if they haven't got permission to film behind the scenes with Ferrari that weekend, maybe that'll make things difficult. But yeah, they're kind of the big storylines that I was disappointed we didn't see much of. But I'll be interested to know your opinions once you've watched it. And you'll have to let me know what you guys think. So that was my recap of season 7 of Drive to Survive. As I mentioned, is available to stream everywhere on Netflix from March 7th. And although I might have sat here and I feel like I was generally pretty positive, and Netflix are not asking me to be, really nice about it. I can kind of review it in how I want. But yeah, I'm really thankful anyway to Netflix for letting me see this early. Please let me know what you think of it yourself. Reach out to me on socials. Leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Yeah, I really am so keen to record more episodes in this studio. Who knows if I'm going to make any additions to it, but at the moment I really like the studio as it is. And yeah, I can't wait to record more from here. I can't wait to do more on YouTube for you guys. If there's anything that you want to see from this, me and producer Paul, as he's going to be affectionately known as, giving a little wave, even though there's no cameras on him. But we even spoke about the possibility of doing live episodes and things like that. So there's so much potential. I'm beyond excited. But for now, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Love you lots. Bye-bye.